Welcome everyone. For those of you who've been listening to my podcast or paying attention to my YouTube channel, you probably noticed um, I haven't done any interviews before. So, I mean, I've been interviewed on other people's podcasts, but actually I decided, hey, why not? I got a lot of great colleagues and friends around me. Why am I not talking to some of them who I think are doing awesome and incredible work? So, with that said, I want to introduce my good friend Lama Karma. We're going to chat today about both his Dharma work as a Dharma teacher and especially his work with Anuma. Anuma on the website, it says Anuma is a digital. It offers digital group therapeutics combining virtual reality with the science of psychedelics, investing the future of authentic human connection. Inventing the future of authentic human connection to address the global mental health crisis. So welcome, Lama Karma. It's really nice to see you. It's just as a friend, it's nice to see you after a while too.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, and thanks for inviting me. And we have a genuine heart connection, as Dharma brothers, and also through our teachers and lineages. And it was great to finally find you in this life, and I look forward to whatever we're doing from this point. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Beautiful way to put it. Yeah, totally, man. Same for mine. Dharma brother for life. Or lives, as probably is more realistic.
Depending on your frame of reference, yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I thought to start off talking, just introducing you to I did a brief introduction, but Lama Karma is a Dharma teacher in its own right. He was able to complete 2 3-year retreats at what's now Palpung Tupten Choling, right?
Yep.
In upstate New York. And how long have you've been teaching Dharma for quite a long time? Yeah.
Yeah, since I came out of that second retreat in 2011.
Okay. And also Lama Karma is the head, or I don't know the title. You're the head of a retreat center in Tennessee, Milarepa Choing right?
Yeah, we just call it Milarepa Retreat Center because of awkward Tibetan acronyms and things. So yeah, Milarepa Retreat Center in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee.
Cool. So maybe if we have some time, we can get into that too.
Yeah.
And you're currently living in upstate New York, right?
Yeah. So we split our time between here I'm in Saugerties, Woodstock area, and then in Tennessee. Yeah.
Cool. So other than Lama Karma being an awesome dude and friend, like I said, the reason I wanted to have him on for my very first interview, actually, he was one of the first people I thought of, was just because of some of the awesome work he's doing, both, of course, as a Buddhist teacher and meditation teacher, but also, as I said, with Anuma. So kind of in your words, Lama Karma, what is Anuma? I think when we were initially, just for the audience here, Lama Karma has been asking me many times, hey, you should try this. And, I'm like, I don't have a VR headset, a virtual reality headset. He's like, oh, you can get one easily. And I'm just kind of like, oh, okay. And I'm kind of not so serious about it. So unfortunately, I haven't tried it. So that was kind of my first thing to kick off our convo was I'm curious, like how you would describe Anuma to an outsider who hasn't done it before, like me, and maybe someone who does meditate, already, like me. So yeah, I'd be curious what you have to say about that.
Sure. Yeah. I love that you read that from the website because it makes me cringe, right? So this, whenever, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg himself talking about the inevitable future of the metaverse and the world of virtual reality and how many promises it gives, whatever else, or this wild world of psychedelics, much of which is really beneficial and really, truly helping people, whether at the end of life or for PTSD and just other relational issues. There's many applications that are actually really driving benefit. But you and I being in spiritual communities, when you sort of mix these streams with a spiritual path, it's very dubious. And so I applaud anybody who, when you read that, was like, "Oh no, what are we getting into here?" So a
I
little
can read
bit
it
of a
again if you want, and we can read
no,
it like
no, just
with that in
so a
mind.
little bit of a preamble there. At the same time, it's happening, and there are, not to oversell, this idea of a metaverse or multiverse, or this idea that we are now as humans approaching the point at which we can represent our reality in a new, more fully immersive way. So representation is something that, or mimesis, something that humans have done since forever. And whether it's spoken language or written language or visual representation, all the way up to what's happening now, that's what we do. And the Dharma is right there with it. It's the spoken Dharma, the written Dharma, the visual Dharma. It's all part of the Dharma.
Yeah.
And these are, they are potentially skillful means. So on one hand, it's potentially leads to further delusion and so forth, and on the other, it's potentially skillful means. And so the short of it is how, given that virtual reality is happening now, then we can maybe stick to that. What's the best way of doing it? Like, how do we bring the Dharma into it, more most pointedly, but how can we make it beneficial, in a general sense? So Enuma is an attempt, and the way that I usually talk about it, it's a group of collaborators, a company that is devoted to creating a sacred experience in virtual reality, and everything that entails, including connection, interpersonal connection, transformation on some level of view, opening of the heart, truly beneficial, sacred experience. So that's the vision, that's the goal and the motivation. And then, we've done many things along those lines with that inspiration.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I think this is kind of how I was thinking of our conversation too, because I was thinking, and I don't like to generalize too much, but I think in the modern Western world, at least, and in my experience growing up in the United States, so I could just speak for someone coming from the United States, maybe even though I live in Colombia and Mexico these days, between those two countries. I think we're in a crisis of connection. So that was kind of one of my first thoughts is like, and a lot of that is technology. It seems like it's making it worse sometimes. It seems like social, ironically, social media is called social, but it actually can create more isolation and less social connection, or maybe we could say like less embodied social connection. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of one of the things I've been skeptical about VR and whatever the metaverse is, because I don't think no one exactly knows what the metaverse is going to be. I think it's just sort of the lots of ideas and people trying different things. So just curious how Enuma, I mean, you stated it a little bit, but if there's more detail on like how you see that from the perspective of Enuma, especially in kind of what you're offering through it.
That sort of tension between connection and disconnection.
Yeah, because I think it's sort of like,
for sure,
you named it. It's like, how do we use? I mean, maybe I'll start with a premise that I kind of, my mind has changed over time on these kinds of issues, and I'm sure it'll change more over time. I never try to stay static and sort of like, oh, I believe this. I'm always watching. But I was reading some material. I'm really, I go through phases with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and I'm in a big Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche kind of reading phase right now. And he was saying it's very naive to think we can like go back to kind of primitive human culture. And he was saying there's a lot of good things about more primitive tribal living, earth living, etc. And he was like, but he was also very realistic in his opinion was we're not going to go back to that. And so we have to learn to, he called it, I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close to what he was saying. We have to learn to work with the machines, and we have to learn to integrate Dharma with the machines. And I thought, wow, I mean, so there's a lot to say around that, but I want to hear more from you. So just with that premise, kind of like, how do you see that, and what are you guys doing to work on that?
The first thing that comes up is it might seem tangential, but there's a great book called The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abrams, and he talks about how early on Plato was so suspicious of writing, like something we
Mm,
take like so totally for granted. And he's saying, this is probably not a good idea. And Abrams does this amazing sort of weaving of a story where showing how coincidentally, perhaps, but probably not, at the time that we as humans learned to represent our reality in the written word, there was a loss of the animistic sensibility, the sense
mm,
that the world is alive, that rocks, trees, plants, everything is alive. And you might argue that, well, actually, you can create poetry and re-imbue these things with life. And so, there's always going to be these flip sides. And as in the context of Dharma, it's not about being optimistic or pessimistic about what is developing. It's about being skillful and
mm.
actually intervening with the proper view and motivation. And so, same thing here. It's like, okay, now in virtual reality, we can immerse ourselves into what is amounts to, in many ways, a lucid dream, where we can make mind manifest, which is kind of the etymology of psychedelic, mind manifesting. Your thoughts can manifest in different ways, and that hasn't been done before. Not only that, but we can also um, bring people together from different geographical locations, not just through Zoom, but in a felt experience. And again, not in the metaverse way where we can now do business around a table from corners of the world, but rather we can feel one another and exchange meaningful uh, prayer. Basically, we can pray for one another. We can hold sacred space for one another. And that, that other than in the kind of psychic domain, that hasn't really been possible for normal people. Right? And so
Yeah.
it's really huge. And not only that, but we can occupy the same physical space, which is a friend of mine who is one of the main developers, coined this new phenomenological thing called coalescence, where you and your energy body and my energy body can intermingle in such a way that there is a felt experience of union in
Mm,
some way. And so there are new advantages to all of this, for sure. And at the same time, there's going to be a flip side. There is a dark side to all of this material. It's reliance on, well, Facebook for one. We're using primarily Meta as a platform,
okay.
and then everything that goes along with that, which maybe we are a Trojan horse for, hopefully in some way, but also, the way that the reliance on rare earth metals and whatever else. And there's lots of critiques that you can level about this, but fundamentally, I think the main risk and that connection disconnection tension is what is the extent to which, when using this new technology, we are actually reinscribing the basis of samsaric habit. What
Mm,
is the extent to which we're actually intensifying dualistic experience? And what is the extent to which we are actually pointing to the root of confusion by means of this technology?
mm,
And that makes all the difference, having that question in mind. And through the development, we've come up with a number of similar tensions that echo one another along those lines that really make it clear. Is this, internally we just call it VR versus shitty VR. And
I like that.
but you
Very.
might, yeah, but externally you might say, VR1 versus VR2. One scholar has put
Sure.
it. But there's a distinction to be made in what is beneficial, and especially from the Dharma point of view, which I think goes much deeper. what is pointing at the truth, and what is actually reinscribing delusion and intensifying the causes of samsara. So, that's it.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, just briefly, well, hopefully briefly, you and I could probably go on a long tangent about this. I think generally this is one of the things missing from the conversation around the meditation world in general. Like let's just say the greater market of meditation is what are we actually trying to accomplish? Like is meditation, what is meditation serving? And I think a lot of the times that's not talked about, or that's there's a limiting belief around what that can serve. Or I think if people understand at least partly what the depths, maybe they understand, some people, the depths of it, and then they choose one way to serve through it. And I don't think that's necessarily, there's a problem with that. But I do think this idea for us, because being in both long-term practitioners in Tibetan Buddhism, this idea of view, what we call view in Tibetan Buddhism, what are we trying to get used to? What are we bringing about through meditation? So actually meditation is much less about the technique for us, and it's more a tool in service of actually transforming or shifting our perspective into I guess in one way at first it looks like a religious view. I mean, for me it did 20 years ago, and now it doesn't. It's just like, oh yeah, that's like, because we start to peek through to the other side of like, well, reality isn't the way I'm perceiving it all the time. And we start to see, well, there is something that can unfold that maybe is more natural and less diluted and less suffering. So, I think that's really great. You guys are thinking about that in relation to VR, in relation to Enuma and the products you're developing, because it's again, I think already I would say like that makes a huge difference to me, because it shows VR is the tool, and then of course what you're offering through it, but there's a view you're trying to get. And so I guess I'd love to hear your thoughts on that if you have any. You kind of already spoke on it, but also I kind of want to hear, like, my second question would be, why VR? You said a little bit about it, but like do you think VR is particularly apt at maybe a method for what you're trying to, the view you're trying to bring about through it?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. So the first part is a bit a larger question for sure. And how does the view manifest in the work that we do? And I guess, and it is related to the answer to the second question. And maybe I start there. So my childhood friend, a really close friend of mine, had fell. He fell from a cliff, 30 meters, which is kind of there's a motif in Zen Buddhism about that kind of thing happening. And so at that time,
but it literally happened to him.
Literally happened, and he fell, and his body was crushed, and he was dying, watching himself die, and had an out-of-body experience, what might be characterized as a near-death experience, and has been, and that sort of has informed certain things for him after that point. And that was when I was in my first retreat, and I remember that happening in 2008 or something. I really encourage, and he and I were close, and we've always tried to collaborate, like do something together, rather than just, sort of be our goofy selves, but really create something beautiful and beneficial. And it's always been, we've never really been able to find it. And he's been painting some Tara murals, and he completed one in Portugal. And I went there to do the consecration. And we were talking, and I said, he was talking about his near-death experience. We were talking about deity yoga. And I was saying, so what was your experience at that moment when you were approaching death? And he said that, I really felt a sense of ease and peace about what was happening. And then he said, I was watching my body in the form of energy, just as an energetic manifestation, and particularly the heart center, pulsing with my breath. And that pulsation was diminishing as my life force was leaving. And so then I asked, what what do you think would happen after that light uh, went away and disappeared? And so this is a question about Dharmakaya, basically, this aspect of the bardo of Dharmata dying and so forth. And that's the question, right? And so then I said, you should really put this forward. Like, you should talk about this experience with people. You should make this, something that's really central to everything that you're doing, because it's so potent. And then that was sort of a seed. And then later I jumped on to the Enuma crew, and they asked me to help them develop a contemplative experience. And so he had previously developed the environment, which is, and this is relative to your first question, the normal virtual reality aims to be representational. In other words, it's like there's a desk, a wall, a floor. Your body has an avatar. You can choose what image you want to project to others, and there's a sense of it being real in some way.
Yeah. But human, could we just say like human, maybe? Or?
Yeah, like well, relatable. Like it's something familiar and that subscribes to our preconceptions about what is up and down, left and right, in and out, all that stuff. Me and you, all of that.
Yeah.
But the Enuma environment is radically different because it was developed out of his near-death experience, where instead of avatars, we manifest as energetic clouds with a luminescent heart center. So there's no detail about a person. And instead of a representational environment, it's just open space. Sometimes there's a starscape. Sometimes there's a suggestion of a floor, just so people aren't having vertigo. Sometimes that floor goes away, and you're just in space without a ground. And so what happens just by means of the aesthetic is that people feel, just going into the environment, free in some sense. And there's a freedom in terms of not being obstructed or burdened by the heaviness of habitual grasping to phenomena. That is relaxed, and there's a sense of ease. And then there's not being burdened by my self-image, because it's a multi-person experience. Everyone is appearing in the same way. And even though there is that anonymity, there is, for some reason, paradoxically, deeper intimacy. And so what happens when you get in there is you open up. And that's just as a function of the design aesthetic. And that is, I credit that to my friend Dave Glowacki's experience and his vision in creating that. So then I came into that and said, okay, what can we do here? How do we make, it's a sadhana, basically. I don't have a license to write a sadhana, of this or that deity or a guru yoga or whatever. I could do that, but it would be kind of suspect.
Will start appearing. As
in Terma, I could pull something out of some crevice, or just pull it out of my ass or whatever. But it's not. It's suspect, right? But here it was like, oh wait, this is a different place, and there's different rules. And maybe if we are based in the view and a good motivation, we can create what has the feel of Vajrayana sadhana, not explicitly, but in a suggestive way. Namely, my body is pure. My body is not solid. My body is my Buddha nature radiating. Your body is also your Buddha nature radiating. How do we celebrate that? How do we unfold what is limiting that or obscuring that through a choreographed guided meditation? Yeah. And so here we have, normally we are in a bubble of our own virtual reality. Our habits are our world, me and my world. It's completely conditioned by habit. Now, virtual reality is a bubble within that bubble. So it's either double trouble, because now you have to work yourself out of to an extra layer of delusion, dualistic situation, or because it's virtual and not real, it's kind of it's a liminal experience. It's a little bit left of
Mm.
center. So now you can have perspective on your reality habit and say,
Yeah.
okay, I'm making this up in some way. This is my projection in some way. What now if I go into a virtual environment? How do I bring that perspective here? Coming in and out of it? How do I work with the phenomena and experiences within that environment so that they erase themselves in
Mm.
different ways, so that they dissolve, so that whatever residual grasping there might be is felt and then released? How do we continually use moments of dissolution and the integration of prana and mind, in different ways of moving to point to what is beyond habit? And
Yeah.
so we developed this experience called Ripple, and a lot of it uses the dynamics of Tonglen, and also aspects of Osa, of clear light yoga,
Uh-huh.
and works with that. And so that, the answer to your second question is, he's just my friend. He's a researcher. He's got a lab. He's into VR, and I love him and want to collaborate with him to make something cool and beneficial. The answer to the first question is, how, given that VR is virtual and we're already in virtual reality, how can we work ourselves out of that situation to, a genuine insight?
Yeah.
And it works. Not for everyone. There
Yeah.
is, you have to be in a particular position, but yet for most people, almost everyone, they come out of it with benefit, even if it's just feeling more calm,
Mm.
just feeling more at peace, more able to connect with others. But yet some people actually have a taste of naked awareness, which
Mm-hmm.
is really amazing. And so, this kind of Dharma art project is, I have confidence in it, in some way.
Yeah.
So then that has led, given that a lot of these themes are around death, we pivoted completely to designing experiences for end of life care. And that's
Mm.
kind of where we're going after this point. And we've developed a number of new experiences on those lines.
Yeah.
So
I want to
that's where
ask you.
Enuma is at now.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to ask you about that in a minute. About the kind of connection to death and dying and end of life care. Just if it's okay with you, Lama Karma, just for the listeners out there on YouTube or Spotify or iTunes, just say something because I don't want to assume everybody, is up to speed with the deeper, what I call the deeper end of Buddhism. And so, what you're naming in a way is how you're working with Enuma and you're working with students and clients who come through Enuma to release self-grasping, which in Buddhism is really the main afflictive emotion. It's the main, what we would call the root cause of suffering, is the belief, the grasping to, and the proliferation of like an independent self, to put it in one way. There's many ways we can put it. Or sometimes I say like ego reification, or when there's this sense of an enclosure where we're enclosed in. But when we actually start to question that, just anyone, you don't have to be a Buddhist, you don't have to be a meditator. If you just question where is that, it's very difficult to find. So it brings into question, well, what is the self? And so a primary aspect of Buddhism is looking into that through many different means, through analytical meditation, through resting meditation, through all kinds of different practices. But that is the fundamental principle of what the Buddha taught, that is liberative, that liberates us from suffering and its causes. So, sorry, just a little, just wanted to kind of connect those two together, because
that's wonderful.
Yeah, because you're really pointing that out, that for you, I mean, I'm also really curious about your personal experience. In the sense, like, you're watching other people. You name naked awareness. Also, some of the audience listening might not know what naked awareness is. This is related to the more tantric or Vajrayana forms of realizing what I just described, or recognizing what I just described, that we aren't this fixated, center of self, that actually it's much more of a multiplicity. So I'm curious, like, if you have more to say about that, just based on what I was just saying, or also, your personal experience with it as a longtime meditator. And then And I'd like to hear more about kind of the clear light experience, how you're differentiating between, these experiences of, I think you named, there's like the more the Tonglen kind of work, which is giving and taking practice in Tibetan Buddhism, and then the clear light, working with clear light yoga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's a lot there. Okay, so
sorry, maybe too many questions.
No, this first aspect of grasping, in Tibetan we say zinpa, and it's dagzin, self grasping, but also nidzin, grasping to two. That and noticing that when there is self grasping, there is a correlative grasping to reality habit, the things outside of that self that then appear. And to the extent that there is grasping to self, there will be solidity of objects. And conversely, when self-grasping is released, phenomena are able to play, to be more humorous, dynamic, open, creative, and so forth. And so there's a dynamic there where grasping increases solidity. It also increases polarity. And so the more self-grasping there is, the more the sense that what is objective is out there, over there, different from the self that grasps. And so these dynamics that we can trace through different aspects of Buddhist teaching come into focus very directly in VR, where dualistic experience, it has these qualities of my grasping creates the sense of separation and solidity, and not only that, but my experience is representational. I'm living through the filter of the preconceptions I have about the world. I'm looking at the world through a map rather than the territory itself. That map is conditioned by my habits, my ideas, and it's conceptual. It's a conceptual map.
That's a good point out.
Conversely, when self-grasping is in some way released, that representational aspect starts to become more transparent to the actual terrain, and the solidity dissolves, and the estrangement, the separation, becomes more intimate. So now, on one hand, we have representation, solidity, estrangement. On the other hand, we have, instead of representation, immediacy. And that immediacy is also direct, the dualistic aspect is there, and less solid as well. And there's another aspect you could talk about, embodiment. And then the more we are living in our head, the more we are living in representation in the map. The more we are living in, you can say the body, it's tricky, but as a beginning, we just talk about embodied awareness, which is non-conceptual, is immediate, and is felt, doesn't get involved in all of these habits. So this, in the VR environment, is directly, it offers a really direct perspective on what is good VR and what is not. If what you're doing is disembodied, habitual, dualistic, and so forth, you're creating for the causes of samsara. If, however, if you are able to stay embodied, and able to explore intimacy and connection, then there's a potential for going beyond that. So my experience mainly is through the experience of others. I'm not going to go in there now and practice. It's not, and I wouldn't propose that what we've developed is a substitute for practice. It is something that isn't maybe an intervention, something that can enhance one's practice, and especially the best use cases that I've seen is when we are using these in conjunction with an in-person retreat, where we do a few of these experiences, but those are contained within meditations, contemplations, and relational practices, where then this gives a singular moment that really opens things up. And so, but for me, seeing other people open in that way is really rewarding, and that hasn't faded. if you're practicing, I think there's a plateau at a certain point where the habitual mind is just going to start doing what it does in spite of all of our efforts to the contrary. The mind is just going to start making a habit out of everything, and then
You mean like
ruining
any
it.
kind of, sorry, you mean like any kind of practice, like just sitting on the cushion and meditating every
No,
day?
I mean in VR, but
Oh,
that's
you mean
true
VR?
too.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean that's true too. And the methods of Dharma are skillful to the extent that they resist that, and that
Yeah,
they
I agree.
they
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they erase themselves, and so you
Yeah.
can't get addicted to it. You can't become identified with,
Yeah.
oh, this sadhana that I do, or this yogic practice, or this guru that I'm devoted to. If the guru is doing his job,
Yeah.
she or he is going to erase that, at a certain point and leave you
Totally.
like, now what kind of thing. Same
Yeah. I
with any
mean,
kind of sadhana or whatever.
yeah, just to point out briefly, I mean, to me, this is the key point of like when we're using anything as a skillful means, it has to do that, I mean, that has to be part of the premise of us watching how this is interacting with ourselves and others is like, is it actually reducing ego clinging, or is it just creating another kind of materialism? Because like you just pointed out, I think I just want to emphasize that Buddhist practice, meditation practice, just on its own as it is, can be a form of materialism if we don't understand why we're using it, and we're not using it for that reason. That's why intention, view is so important. I think at some point. I mean, it's one thing when we're new to meditation, we might not know heads from tails, and that's fine. But at some point, we're going to want to mature, and that's when I think this becomes so applicable. So that's really heartening to sort of see that you guys are really it sounds like you're doing a lot of there's a lot of research involved. There's a lot of trial and error, and just seeing like, is it when, how do we make this method through VR not fall into spiritual materialism or any kind of materialism for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And acknowledging that it's actually inevitable. The ego is what is doing the spiritual path. And so all along the way, the ego is going to be co-opting the process inevitably, because if it weren't doing that, there would be no reason to be on a path.
Yeah.
So it's constantly co-opting the process. But the question is there refinement of that? And Zonzo Chenser Rinpoche often quotes, Longchenpa about how the methods we're using should be like a whetstone and a blade. That when you're sharpening the blade on a whetstone, the sharpness of that, which is the wisdom, is something that occurs through mutual exhaustion. The blade is rubbing itself away, the whetstone is being rubbed away, and eventually they exhaust themselves.
Yeah.
And if that is the quality of the method that you're using, then it's more of a fail-safe. It doesn't mean that you're going to spin off in some weird way anyway, because you still have an ego, right? But until that point, that's a hallmark of a wisdom method, right? And that's something that we should be looking out for.
Yeah, I love that distinction. I love that quote from Songso Kensei. Wonderful. Yeah. So I was thinking. So it sounds like to me like your experience. I mean, actually, one thing I'm noticing through our conversation is that actually it sounds like the way you guys set up the design of the VR experience in Enuma so far, at least with Ripple, it sounds like that experience. It would be it would be like kind of boring alone. Like it's almost set up to foster connection. Is what it sounds like. Yeah?
No, yeah, it is interpersonal, and part of what you were asking about how it moves from Tonglen to clear light yoga, that the interpersonal element is integral to that. You basically, there's different ways of practicing in Ripple. Sometimes you're alone and just encountering the vastness of space on your own and working with whatever that might bring up. Sometimes you are in a group working with basically praying for one another as a sacred circle. And then at a certain point coming to union with the whole group, everyone overlaps and inhabits the same energetic space. And then there's a differentiation again. And then at different points, you're working in pairs. And as a prelude to the dissolution sequence, You're exchanging your heart light with another, an other, and that light is moving in and out of you, and both of you are practicing at the same time. So you're developing a relationship with that, and there's an aspect of sacred union that's occurring. And maybe many people have that, either resistance to it, which is also good to feel, or openness to it. And then you sit down facing one another, and you basically hold space for the other as they die,
Wow.
as they pass away. And since you can't see yourself, the gift of the awareness of your own death process is given to you through the presence of the other. So you're seeing them pass away at the same time you are. And much as is the case with care for the dying, oftentimes the caretaker will feel blessed by the gift that the dying person can offer, especially when someone has reached full acceptance of their mortality. Then their passing releases a tremendous amount of blessing. And that witnessing that is to receive that blessing. And so there's something there about that sacred dialogue that's happening.
Sorry to interrupt you. What do you think that's about? Just because I don't want, I'll end up forgetting it.
Why is there a blessing?
Yeah, I've always, I mean, I have some ideas about that. I it's just conjecture, but yeah, why is there a blessing? Because it doesn't. It seems to be a phenomena that doesn't. And now we're talking about real dying. We're not talking about virtual reality. Now we're actually talking about like human death and dying. Now, with the passing of a great realized master, we could probably guess why, but that seems to also happen sometimes around people who weren't necessarily like very realized meditators. So, what do you have any ideas around that? And then we can go back to the VR thing, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, conversely, if someone is resisting death and fearing it, their passing creates chaos. It's not. It's that moment can then create chaos for them. Whatever's happening after that point, for everyone around them, it can be very uncomfortable and dreadful, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's kind of a spectrum there where if you've reached a state of at least acceptance, where you have deep fundamental peace with what is the unknown, which from a Buddhist standpoint is reality of awareness beyond all habit and grasping. When you let go of everything, if someone or going to God or whatever, someone or into the void, even if you are an agnostic, or even believing that maybe nothing particular is going to happen to your continuum after you die, but you're fundamentally at peace with that in an open-hearted way that's connecting you with everything. There's still some beauty in that, I think. And so I think what happens is that when someone moves into that with that kind of peace, it's communicated, and people feel it because there's a release of some deep level of grasping that happens at the moment of death, and that unlocks an energy, you might say, for lack of a better word. But then better to think of it, well, okay, so not only am I at peace, but may my death be a gift to everyone around me. May my death be a gift to all sentient beings. May my death be a gift to all sentient beings, past, present, and future. And you just expand bodhicitta to its utmost, and then you die. What happens then?
No.
Or you have actually realized that motivation and integrated it with every fiber of your being as a true master, and then you die. What happens then? So I think there's a spectrum there of that, what can be transmitted.
Yeah, I've been talking about in my Dharma talks lately, and just with one-on-one mentees, I've been talking a lot about awareness as an app, like an aperture on a camera, that can allow less or more light. And I think that's a nice analogy towards what you were just describing. It's like, depending on our connection to non-dual awareness or naked awareness, like from a Buddhist perspective, just for some of you out there who are listening and don't know or haven't studied Vajrayana Buddhism much, the one of the premises of Vajrayana Buddhism is that at the time of the death, it's like just as a shell being cracked open, the aggregates of our form, cease to function, and then our inner energies also sort of break open, and it's almost like you can imagine. This sounds very morbid or dark. If we don't have the perspective that underneath that egg is, you can imagine this extremely pure, light, and it's not literal light, but we often use that term in Tibetan. They often use terms that refer to light as an analogy. And so, when this happens at the time of death, everyone, no matter if they're a meditation master or, frankly, like could be even just a really shitty person. We all experience a very brief moment of this pure nature of mind. This is coming from the Vajrayana perspective in Buddhism. Now, not many people recognize that at the time of death, right? So for people like Lama Karma and I, part of our motivation for Dharma practice in life is to be able to, I think so, I don't want to speak for you, but, it is to train in it in life as best we can, so we can rest in that and expand that. So, going back to that aperture, expand that at the time of death. So going back to that aperture analogy, it's almost like kind of what you're saying. It's like a spectrum. So, in that sense of like everybody's, connecting with it, but some are able to expand that more, or we could say like, allow it to be more expansive and rest in that expansiveness, maybe, right?
Yeah.
So you were talking about Tonglen, and we didn't define Tonglen too much, and I'm just looking at the time here, because actually I think we're good, because I'd like to kind of mostly talk about a little bit more into death and dying and how Enuma works with that. But it sounds like what's happening is some kind of virtual reality Tonglen with the design you described already, and then that's shifting into a clear light yoga as the person dies. So I'd love to hear, maybe you can introduce some of our listeners to kind of like a very brief synopsis of what Tonglen is from the traditional perspective, and maybe a brief synopsis of what clear light yoga is, and then maybe describe how that connects to Enuma.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Your video froze for me, but it might not be a problem.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah.
So with Tonglen in the traditional context, there's many different ways of practicing it. There can be, there's a way of practicing it that is very much in line with the Mahayana. In other words, exchanging oneself for another, inviting their adversity, their suffering into oneself as a way of counteracting self-grasping, self-cherishing, and then offering one's best qualities to that other person, inverting the normal habit of keeping what's best and giving what's less. And so there's a method of doing that. There's a more tantric method of doing that. But there's also a way of doing that in terms of awareness, where it's not so much about an object, even if we are in the presence of another and we're practicing in this more awareness-based way. It's just about accepting and welcoming the totality of what is, and feeling maybe our resistance to being that vulnerable, breathing it in. And then as we breathe out, just offering, releasing, opening. And so it's a practice of mutual opening. We're opening to what is around us, and we're opening what is usually withheld and offering it panoramically. And it's a way of more working on the level of duality, that sense of separation between self and other, opening through that. And so that type of exchange, and this is something that comes primarily through my relationship with Lama Deni Rinpoche in France, and the open mindfulness program that he developed was a major influence for this. So we transposed that into the VR environment, along with so the previous Kalu Rinpoche developed a cycle of yoga called Nangpa Yoga, which was an accessible way to practice the Tibetan yogas, which are generally take a lot of preparation and are not for everybody. And he developed a kind of almost secular, in some ways, form of yoga. And in that, he developed a motion that goes with that type of offering, where you open the arms and the feet. Actually, you're sitting and you open your legs and arms, and then you bring your arms back as you're receiving. And I use that as an inspiration for what we were talking about before, how to make mind manifest in the environment. And we could use biofeedback, sensors, whatever, but the easiest way to do it is just to move the body in accord with our mental disposition, moving our body outward as we're offering and bringing our hands and arms in as we're receiving. And as we do that, the heart energy, we see our own heart energy go out into space and then return again. And there's different things that happen. Sometimes that heart energy goes out into space and just dissolves. And then we rest in that dissolution with no breath. And then we breathe in. And we can also practice dissolving with the out breath, something that's taught in the Dzogchen tradition. But that's the kind of spirit of it. So there's an aspect of going beyond, that sense of boundary normally and working with that, and also of dissolution. And that prepares us for what I was saying before about this moment of holding space for the dissolution of the other, in which we are also contemplating our own dissolution, where we sit down and this is part of clear light yoga, which is a training for the deep sleep state, so bringing luminosity into the stage of our sleep, of our night, where there's no content, there's no movement of mind, and typically we're just ignorant and unconscious. But there's a yoga for transforming that into awareness. So that's called clear light. And that is also a preparation for the time of death, when, as you said before, the physical aggregates dissolve, the subtle body dissolves, and consciousness then dissolves. And what we're left with is, who knows what we might call it, but there's nothing that you can say about it. It has no attributes. Preparing for
but it's
that,
not nothing.
But it's not nothing, right?
Nothing.
But it's not nothing. And if we recognize it, it is actually a refulgent luminosity with no subject or object. And so that clear light yoga that we train in for the deep sleep state has a lot of relevance for the time of death, when we lose all reference points. What remains, if we can, like you were saying before, if we can recognize that, that's very beneficial. So at this moment of dissolution, we watch the other person's light throbbing and fading, and there's a way of breathing and going that, and then it dissolves, much like in a completion stage sadhana, the dissolution into a drop of light, and then that just vanishes. And at that moment, there's a reflection on what remains. What is that? It's not nothing. How do we, just different instructions that I give at that point. And then it comes back, and it comes and goes. And at this point, then it's a Vipassana practice that has to do with the Vipassana, meaning insight, looking at so things arise and things disappear. What is the continuity between things happening and dissolving? How do we start to point out something that's beneath that or within that aspect of continuity? And so then there's instructions for Vipassana at that point to help people to integrate the movements of mind, manifestation and dissolution. And then out of that, then our bodies manifest, everybody's back, and the group is there, and then we come together, and then that's an opportunity for sharing and exchange.
Beautiful. Wow. I felt like I just went through that a little bit just hearing you talk.
Cool. Yeah.
I'm like imagining it. I'm doing the VR in my mind. I could picture it. Beautiful. And like you said, it sounds like there's a lot of, I mean, obviously it's in a group, so there's connection, and you've already done a lot of activities to make, that connection stronger, it sounds like. But there's, how do you say it? Okay, well, maybe I'll shift here. So with that, then how are you guys? How are you working with death and dying? Because you told me that a little bit briefly when we were chatting before this, that you're thinking of Enuma also as a way to help people who are actually dying. As a way to use VR. I mean, which sounds like, because we were talking about earlier about like, well, how do we use technology in a healthy way? I mean, we're talking a lot about traditional Buddha Dharma here, especially Vajrayana Buddhism, but it sounds like part of the mission is just to help people to live and die in a healthier way through VR.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really curious about that, and what you just described for us as Tibetan Buddhist practitioners would be a meditation to work with death and dying on a very profound level, right? But anything else you want to share around that? Is there other things kind of
well, that's the whole next chapter, right? And so starting in September, we developed 3 new experiences that are comparable in terms of complexity to Ripple: choreography, scripting, music, the whole thing, programming. 3 new experiences that run about 35 to 45 minutes, and developing that with the intention of it being a program that the primary participant, someone who has received a terminal diagnosis, would invite whoever they want, their loved ones, people that they want to share this with. And primarily the benefit, and we've done many sessions already, and we're continuing to gather data on this, but the primary benefit is just the way that it allows families, maybe or loved ones, to be vulnerable with one another and address the fact that their loved one is dying, and for that loved one to be regarded. It's not something that you need to skirt around anymore. Like, here's a safe space where I can actually share how I'm feeling. You can share how you're feeling. And it's held in a context that is acknowledging mortality. And it's not trying to get around it in any way. It's not throwing in your face either. And there's a kind of a degree to which we actually go there if the person wants that and is ready for that, or we don't, and just allow that arc to do the work it does on its own. And so we ran a program with 8 women, all of which have terminal diagnosis, who were a cohort, and they ran through it, and all of them were so touched by it that they decided to take our offer of doing these experiences on their own with people that they would select. And so now we're in the midst of doing that. And then we've also been running sessions with just incidental individuals who want to have that service. And it's been really amazing. And there's so much to say about how we designed it and the structure of it, but you might say that there's the first experience is really about catharsis, doing a life review, going through aspects of our biography where, as a child, as an infant, as an adolescent, whatever it might be, where we needed love, we needed support, we needed compassion, and really giving. It's the practice of self-compassion, basically, in order to redeem the ghosts and bring back the pieces of ourselves that are not integrated. And so there's a whole experience of that. And the second experience, and that's called life. And the second experience is called boundless. And this is similar to Ripple in some ways. It's a way of creating an out-of-body experience that ends in a dissolution. It gives themes of what is it like to let go and rest without reference. And then the third experience is called life, offering. And this is a way of... there's kind of a central light, and people go into it and publicly held in the presence of others, and let go of whatever might be burdening them, and then later on calling in blessing and assistance. And through the presence of the group, their kind, loving attention, then everyone has this experience of blessing, basically, and then it ends with a sequence of reflecting on what gift, ideally, if the primary participant is open to it, it's a way of honoring each person. Reflects on what is a quality that this dying person has that I want to steward, that I'm committed to developing more fully in myself, and going forward in life. Giving that the dying person a sense that they are in some way living on through their own virtues that they then appreciate, being mirrored to them by the others, and then the primary participant reflecting on, like we talked about before, what is a gift that they want to give to the world. Normally, dying people feel like everything's being taken away from them. And that they have nothing to give. But how then is this an opportunity to recontextualize that as, their condition is actually an opportunity in some way, without sugarcoating it? And by this point, there's such an intimacy with the group that it's very genuine, and it's very emotional generally.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of arc of things, and then between there's calls and opportunities for integration and so forth.
Wow. That sounds not only, I mean, obviously really powerful, but amazing, like an amazing service.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so much wonderful work going on around death and dying now. Just because it's, I think, becoming at least a partial cultural recognition of like how much we ignore and suppress it, and that it actually just makes it worse. It doesn't make people die better, more happy. It doesn't help family, when they've lost someone. I lost my mom at a young age, when I was 16, and I can relate to a lot of this. I mean, I had to do work like this on my own, over time. Not exactly that, but I didn't have that time with her, to do this. And I would have really appreciated something like this. I mean, that's pretty amazing because it sounds like it's like, I mean, my experience with my mom's death, for instance, was. It's continued to be beneficial for me, and mostly because in Buddhism, and we center it as something to actively think about. We center it as, life is only life in relation to death. And so for me, it's been kind of one of the, an experience of the Buddhist path giving me that gift of being able to relate to her and her death and her life in this context of my life and my death. And so it sounds so beautiful. Like you're offering that to people in an experience where they're not necessarily, they don't have contact with the Buddhist path or they're not Buddhist or they're not, whatever. They could be anything. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And that's the effort to not have anyone be turned off because of a particular worldview or metaphysic, and being able to have a full spectrum of beneficial things to do and contemplate that are not secular, that are sacred, but are also not limited because they're coming from a particular tradition or worldview. And so, if there is a worldview, that it is continuity, that this is not the end in some way, and that it's not explicitly made clear, but that is behind everything. So at least that, but that is really important to be able to meet everyone where they're at. And then, if there are mind teachings that are typically reserved for people who are practitioners and are ready for them, in this case, it's just something that sort of blows over. And it's not, if you get it, amazing. If you don't get it, it's not going to affect the experience at all. And it's not going to detract from the benefit of what you're doing. So at least for me, it was really important to have at least 1 minute at some point in the whole arc of something that is actually talking about the Bardo of Dharmata, this moment of death. And if you get it and it touches you, that's fine. But even if you don't, you might not even notice it. It's fine. No problem. And I should say also that it's really beneficial for the caretakers as well. So doctors, hospice workers, palliative care people, this makes the work that they do so much easier and so much more effective, and it allows them to care whereas in a lot of cases, it's not so easy
Mm,
to really get through. So yeah. Anyway.
wonderful. Yeah, yeah. That I'd love to continue. I mean, I'd love to have another conversation after you know, you're obviously testing it, but when you roll it out, you know, because there is there's those touch points of the dying person, the family and close ones of the dying person, or the and then the, like you said, the caretakers, and often
Mm-hmm.
there's so much complexity
Mm-hmm.
you know, between those relationships, and that you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking of all
For
three
sure.
is quite
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Family dynamics and like, yeah, care dynamics. And it's, yeah, a lot of it you can just go right under that, which is really amazing.
yeah, yeah. Well, my
The
friend,
space has to
as a,
be held. I mean, the space has to be held in a particular way. It's not, you can't just plug them into this program and let it run.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
the facilitation is a huge element, and without that, it may not work. You might put it that way.
Yeah,
But
that's a
yeah.
good point, because I think there's been this tendency in popular meditation that, like, oh yeah, just we're just going to make an app for that, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
in a computer program, or probably now AI, you know, an AI
Mm-hmm.
will run it.
Mm-hmm.
And so and what I'm hearing is like, actually the VR is just kind of like the mechanism, but actually, you know, because we started this conversation, I was really curious about connection, and you know, how is technology going to continue to, like, does it innately disconnect us, or is that just, you know, how we use it, right? And we talked about that a little bit earlier, but it sounds to me like you guys, because there's that human component, the facilitation all the way through as the primary, you know, relational point, that connection isn't lost. So maybe that's kind of, I don't know if we, you know, we have an answer, but I think that is an interesting thing to note, that like,
Mm-hmm.
when technology is, when we're using it as a means, maybe, but there's facilitation and there's always a human point of connection, maybe it can go in some healthy
Mm-hmm.
directions, right?
Yeah, and heart
Yeah,
to heart and mind to mind. You know that level of connection is there and is facilitated by the environment and the technology. It
yeah.
can be, it might not be, but if it is, then it may be good. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. When as Chat GPT and all these other things progress, so we'll come
Right.
back and
Yeah.
and have a combo about AI, because I'm curious. I was talking to another meditation teacher friend. We were like, yeah, like what we were like conjecture. You know, we were just dreaming, like what parts of our work is AI going to replace, and what parts
Mm-hmm.
isn't. You know, isn't it going to be able to replace? I think a lot of people are thinking about that right now.
Yeah, no, I think we're as meditation teachers, I think we are probably in a better position than most. So
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think we're a little bit more down the list.
yeah, yeah.
He very optimistically said at least 10 years. I was like, probably more like two. You know,
Mhm.
like the copywriters, they're coming for the copywriters first, and then maybe we're like more like two. But anyways, man, I really appreciate this, Lama Karma. This is awesome, and just I'm really inspired by the work you're doing. You know, just your general Dharma teaching as always, and through Anuma. And you know, where can people check this out? On YouTube, I'll put a link in the description, but on Spotify and iTunes, it won't be there. So just, you know, where can they check this out more?
Yeah, Anuma.com.
Okay.
um, is the website. And then there's a wonderful article in the MIT Tech Review. It came out a few months ago that talks about some of the studies that we've done previously, or primarily David Glowacki's lab has done, and that's where the psychedelic element comes in,
Yeah.
comparing the outcomes to outcomes in psychedelic assisted therapy
Uh,
and mystical experiences and so forth. So
yeah,
that
that was
you can look at that MIT article is really good too.
cool. You just reminded me, that was one thing
Just
I wanted to ask about that we didn't get time to, like
yeah,
the
that's a whole
psychedelics and
wormhole,
VR.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so just look up psychedelics and VR MIT, and you'll
Cool.
find it.
Um, just anything you know, before we jump off, anything you want to share in your world, or kind of what's up for you?
No,
Or
just thank you so much. This it's always great to be with you, and we're geographically further apart now than ever. But hopefully we see each other soon. And love to have you to Tennessee, to our Dharma Center there, to do whatever, whenever, and yeah, and invite anybody who is listening to connect. Open to many things. So yeah, thanks a lot,
awesome,
Scott.
man. Thanks, Lama Karma. Really, really appreciate it, man. Okay.
Cool. All
Lots of
right.
love.
Thanks. See you later.